Welcome to the Baby Therapist's Crash Course, where we help you navigate the wild world of counseling and crush those board exams with confidence. Whether you're fresh out of grad school or knee-deep in client sessions, this podcast is your go-to guide for mastering the skills you need to succeed. I'm Tia Marie, your host and fellow baby therapist, here to break down complex concepts, share study tips, and get you exam ready without the stress. Let's dive in. Navigating the DSM-5-TR Updates. Overview for the NCMHCE exam. Welcome back to the Baby Therapist's Crash Course. Today we're tackling the essential updates from the DSM-5-TR that could appear on your NCMHCE exam. These recent changes may seem overwhelming, but I've broken them down into clear, actionable points to help you feel prepared. Whether it's understanding new severity codes for eating disorders or recognizing the nuances in diagnoses like prolonged grief disorder, we've got you covered. So grab your notebook and let's dive into the crucial updates you need to know for your exam. The DSM-5-TR has introduced some important changes, and with the NCMHCE exam evolving to reflect these updates, it's crucial to stay on top of the latest information. In this episode, we'll focus on areas like eating disorders, neurocognitive disorders, mood dysregulation, and more. We'll also cover updates on differential diagnoses and assessment tools that could trip you up if you're not familiar with them. By the end of this episode, you'll have a solid grasp of the changes and how they impact clinical practice and your exam. Let's break it down. Feeding and eating disorders, new coding, and severity criteria. One of the biggest areas to focus on is the updated feeding and eating disorders. The DSM-5-TR has introduced new ICD-10-CM codes and expanded the criteria for remission and severity levels. Let's start with Pica and Rumination Disorder. The new coding splits these disorders by age, so for kids Pica is coded as F98.3, while for adults it's now F50.83. Same goes for Rumination Disorder, F98.21 for children, F50.84 for adults. Anorexia nervosa, Bulimia nervosa, and Binge Eating Disorder all have new codes that reflect the severity of the disorder: mild, moderate, severe, and extreme. They've also introduced codes to capture partial and full remission for these disorders. What to study? Make sure you're familiar with the new severity levels for anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder, and know how to apply remission codes in different case scenarios. Make sure you're familiar with the new severity levels for anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder, and know how to apply remission codes in different case scenarios. Adjustment disorders, updated subtypes. Adjustment disorders have also been fine-tuned to provide clearer differentiation, especially with the subtype with disturbance of conduct. This subtype now specifies specific behavioral violations like vandalism, truancy, or reckless driving, which you'll need to recognize in case vignettes. Key subtypes to know: with depressed mood, with anxiety, with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, with disturbance of conduct, with mixed disturbance of emotions and conduct. What to study? Be ready to match case symptoms to the appropriate adjustment disorder subtype. For example, if a client shows behavioral issues like vandalism or truancy, you'd look at the with disturbance of conduct subtype. Neurocognitive disorders, NCD, mixed etiology, and Alzheimer's disease. Here's a critical change. Neurocognitive disorders, NCD, due to Alzheimer's disease no longer exclude mixed etiology. This means you can now diagnose Alzheimer's even when there's another contributing condition, like vascular disease. What to study? Be prepared to identify cases where a client may have more than one contributing cause of cognitive decline, like Alzheimer's paired with vascular issues. Understanding how to diagnose mixed etiology is key. Disruptive Mood Dysregulation Disorder, DMDD, differential diagnosis. The DSM-5-TR clarifies that children who meet criteria for both DMDD and oppositional defiant disorder, ODD, should be diagnosed with DMDD, not ODD. This is especially important when you're working on vignettes involving younger clients. What to study? Study the differential diagnosis between DMDD and ODD, ADHD, and anxiety disorders. Knowing when to prioritize a DMDD diagnosis can save you points on the exam. Prolonged grief disorder. Distinguishing it from normal grief. Prolonged grief disorder is now distinct from normal grief, and the DSM-5-TR sets a timeline, 12 months for adults and 6 months for children. Symptoms include emotional pain, yearning for the deceased, and difficulty moving on with life. What to study? Be able to differentiate between prolonged grief disorder, normal grief, and major depressive disorder. Pay close attention to the timeframes and specific symptoms required for diagnosis. DSM-5 online assessment measures. The DSM-5-TR has also updated Level 2 Mania assessments, specifically the Altman Self-Rating Mania Scale. This assessment tool now has corrections to the 0-4 rating scale, which applies to both adults and children ages 6 to 17. There's also a new cultural formulation interview for active duty military members and veterans, designed to assess cultural factors in diagnosis and treatment. What to study? Review the Altman Self-Rating Mania Scale and the new cultural formulation interview to understand how these tools are used in clinical practice. Social conditions impacting health. New codes. Finally, let's talk about 2 new ICD-10-CM codes that reflect social determinants of health. These new codes, Z59.71 for insufficient health insurance and Z59.72 for insufficient welfare support, will help you better capture the impact of these factors in your treatment planning. What to study? Be ready to apply these new codes in case scenarios where social or financial factors play a role in the client's situation, particularly in cases involving access to care or economic stressors. Study tips for the exam. Now that we've reviewed the key changes, let's talk about how to study for the NCMHCE. Focus on the updates. Prioritize studying areas that have been updated, especially around eating disorders, neurocognitive disorders, and DMDD. Focus on the updates. Prioritize studying areas that have been updated, especially around eating disorders, neurocognitive disorders, and DMDD. Practice case studies. Apply these new criteria in practice narratives and case studies to understand how the updates affect real-world diagnosis and treatment. Practice case studies. Apply these new criteria in practice narratives and case studies to understand how the updates affect real-world diagnosis and treatment. Know your differential diagnosis. Be sharp on distinguishing between similar conditions, like DMDD versus ODD or prolonged grief versus depression. Master the assessment tools. Familiarize yourself with the DSM-5 assessment measures, especially updates to mania scales and the cultural interview tools. Time management. As always, pace yourself and take advantage of review opportunities in the exam. Overview and key takeaways. To summarize, stay on top of the coding changes for feeding and eating disorders, including severity and remission criteria. Be clear on the updated subtypes for adjustment disorders, especially when it comes to conduct violations. Understand that NCD due to Alzheimer's disease can now be diagnosed alongside other etiologies. Know when to prioritize DMDD over other disorders, like ODD or ADHD in kids. Be prepared to differentiate prolonged grief disorder from normal grief and depression. using specific timeframes. Review the updated DSM-5 assessment tools, including the Altman Self-Rating Mania Scale. Be aware of new codes related to insufficient health insurance and welfare support. That's all for today's episode of the Baby Therapist's Crash Course. The DSM-5-TR updates may seem daunting, but with some focused study, you'll be ready to tackle them on exam day. Don't forget to share this episode with fellow therapists prepping for the NCMHCE, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more exam tips. Want to support this podcast? Show your appreciation through my Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/Jero the Baby Therapist CC. Good luck, stay calm, and remember, you've got this.